everyone. As you prepare and are studying for your celebration of knowledge coming this week, I thought I would make a little video, kind of just going over some of the highlights in verbal and nonverbal communication. I'll probably just do verbal on this one, depending on how long it is, and then do nonverbal on the next video. Um, I can see the glare of the screen in my glasses, which is silly. I don't know if that helps. Anyway, um, the main thing I wanted to, I could teach an entire class on language and the construction of language and how language creates our reality. And so the fact that we spent just 2 weeks on it, and I sent you lots of readings, and hopefully you've read them all. And I wanted to clarify. So the one reading is specifically from a gender communication book, but I want to kind of highlight some of the theories in there because I think it's really relative to interpersonal study specifically. There's sort of three things that reading highlights. And that is linguistic relativity, terministic screens, and framing. And I actually am going to flip uh, framing. Well, no, I'm going to keep them this way, but I kind of link these two and you'll see what I mean. But first I'm going to start with linguistic relativity. And instead of being on a checklist like I have them on my fingers here, for me this one is like an umbrella. So this one is everything. And then the other theories sort of are under it or fall within it. Linguistic relativity basically argues that you can have emotions, feelings, reactions uh, outside of your language, but if you do, there isn't a way to express them or to validate them. Basically, our language creates reality. I'm going to say that again because it's amazing. Our language creates our reality. I have lots of examples of when this happens. But my favorite one to talk about is when transgender individuals, I have heard several transgender individuals give a testimony or discuss the first time they heard the word or read the word transgender. And transgender means when your sex and your gender identity, so your sex being your genitals, chromosomes, hormones, um, don't align with your gender performance. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you're cisgender. Or if you do know what I'm talking about, but that doesn't apply to you, you're what's called cisgender. I'm cisgender. Cisgender is when your sexual identity and your gender identity align. Trans is when they don't align. Uh, for those of you that are Orange is the New Black fans, Laverne Cox is a trans woman, a trans female of color. So to give you an idea. So what often happens is these individuals have felt this feeling, this misalignment their whole lives. And no one has ever told them what that is. And this is not me making this up, because I'm cisgender, so I'm not giving you the testimony. I'm recalling several people who have told me this story, a couple specifically, and they said, I had these feelings for years and years, but I just thought it was me. And then I'm on Reddit or Tumblr one day, and I'm reading about an individual who is describing exactly how I feel. And they're calling it transgender. And I've never heard that word before, but I'm like, oh my gosh, I must be transgender. And suddenly you go from these, uh, you know, random feelings to something that is labeled and therefore validated, and therefore we can discuss or critique it or argue it, right? For example, HRC, the Human Rights Campaign, that's the one that has the blue with the yellow, right? Are you familiar? Google Human Rights Campaign if you don't know what I'm talking about. They've been critiqued in the last several years for spending the majority of their budget on issues that do not connect to transgender individuals. And so the community, both the LGBTQ community and specifically the transgender community, has come back and said, you aren't focusing on these transgender issues. Can you imagine if there wasn't that label, right? You aren't focusing on these misalignment issues or these gender issues over here, right? Do you see how the term works to create that reality? I like to disclose a personal story here to give another example. When I was a sophomore in college, I was diagnosed with an anxiety disorder. And I was so happy. I called home and I yelled in joy and excitement to my mother, guess what? She's like, what? That I have an anxiety disorder. And the reason I was so happy was I always thought that the way I was feeling and my overwhelming thoughts were just me, right? They weren't. I had chemicals misaligned in my brain. It was a tangible thing, and not only was it a tangible thing, but there was a label for it, right? So that label, once I had that label, I could then seek treatment, go to therapy, etc., right? So and obviously uh these are sort of these big examples, but we have examples on multiple different levels about how language works to create reality. And especially well, I'll give another one, especially when you're thinking about, I mean, because remember, language isn't a magic set thing that is true and exists, right? It's constructed. I think I always knew that, but I didn't always really realize it. It wasn't until after undergraduate, and remember, I have a comm theater degree, right? So I mean, I even studied this, and it wasn't until I was studying sign language in my mid 20s that I started to realize this, because we were learning signs, and one of the first signs you learn in sign language is this, which means if. So if I go to the store, I'm going to buy some food. If, right? Um, and one day, one of the teachers was signing, and she signed the word suppose. Suppose. And I asked, why is if and suppose the same sign? And she says, because they're the same word. The same. And what she meant is they're the same meaning. They're the same. And I was like, no, 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 totally different. And she was like, try it. If I pick up this remote and throw it across the room, suppose I pick up this remote and throw it across the room. The same meaning. And that blew my brain, right? That language wasn't this magic set of truth that existed, right? And that everything could be translated, but rather language is developed to express emotions, behavior, feelings, reality, etc. And then of course that changes based on culture, based on time, right? 30 years ago, we did not have the word bay. And I regularly still have to look up what the word bay stands for in acronym form. I know what it culturally means, right? But do you see how language develops as the culture develops and vice versa? It's kind of that chicken and egg thing, right? Does the culture create the language, or does the language help work to create the culture? Um, and of course, this really applies when you get into relationships. So, a couple of stories here about language creating reality. Um, I had this friend who had a little neighbor, and I believe the little neighbor's name was Avery, and she was like three and a half, and her. So my friend had a sister named Julia, and Julia did professional hair. And so one day Julia was over at my friend's house, and Avery's mom went and got her hair done and brought Avery. And so they were all laughing and talking and chatting, and it was great. So a couple weeks later, Avery was out, and she says to my friend, "Hey, how's your boyfriend?" And my friend is like, "What? Who? Your boyfriend?" And my friend is like, "My husband, Nate?" And of course, Avery knows Nate. She's like, no, not Nate. Your boyfriend. How's your boyfriend? And they go back and forth, and my friend is trying to understand. Well, here it comes out. She means Julia, my friend's sister. Well, Avery has a little, uh, there's a little guy that goes to school with her, and they call her, or they call the boy her boyfriend. So she thinks, okay, I have this friend, right? We play together, we hang out together, we laugh together. That's my boyfriend, right? I see you, neighbor, hanging out with this person. You play together, you laugh together. They must be your boyfriend, right? No idea of the gender relational additions there, the cultural additions, right? So as a kid, she is using the term the way that it was used in her reality, right? The other example I have of this, and I can't prove this one, but I think it's great, which is I have this little, he's like a fake nephew, and he's my sister's godchild. His name's Tucker, and his mother is like a fake sister of ours. And when Tucker was little, I met him a couple times, but Tiff got to see him much more than I did. And Tiff was his godmother. So she would take him for ice cream and they would play and they would draw dinosaurs. And I mean, she's Auntie Tiffy. She's the best thing ever. And I got to see him when he was like almost a year old. And I was so excited to see him. I hadn't seen him since he was really little. And so we were all up at this cabin, and my sister was there too. And at one point, he reached for me and he said, Tiffy, Tiffy. And then he went, towards Tiff and called her Tiffy, Tiffy. And I don't think he was confusing us, right? I don't think he was calling me her name. I think he was calling me Tiffy, like auntie, right? Like, oh, a Tiffy is someone who shows up, feeds me yummy things, reads me books, sits me on her lap, plays with me, laughs with me. You do all those things, you must be a Tiffy, right? So linguistic reality means start to think about how language works to create your reality. And not just your reality, but also your relationships, right? So then the reading sort of says terministic screens are very specific pieces of our language that work to point us towards something or away from something. And I think I could do other examples, but I think the one they give is really, really good, right? About the thing that is inside a woman when she conceives, right? Do we label that a fetus? And that points us toward um, the scientific, um, the 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 fact that the thing is inside a woman's body, right? Um, or do we call the thing inside a woman's? I'm pointing to myself. I'm not pregnant. Inside a woman's body, a baby, right? Which points us more towards the emotional relationship, the tangible, right? Because you probably feel very different about a baby than you do a fetus. Um, and so that's a great example of terministic screens. Um, and this is not meant to be a discussion about abortion, as in, like, we're going to talk about abortion, but rather about the rhetoric and the language involved in abortion. Um, and the very real impact the way we use language develops actions, legislation, behavior, etc. Um, so the there was a um, there used to be a law that allowed when a woman had a surgery to remove a whatever you want to call it, a where am I, fetus or a baby, right? Um, that they could take them out whole, right? And conservative legislation worked to get rid of that because they didn't they thought it was inhumane, and the idea behind it, if someone is aborting their baby, right? that if it's too long, if you're having that surgery so far into the process that you shouldn't be able to take it out whole, etc. Well, um, a lot of times that surgery was actually performed on women whose fetuses were not viable anymore. So they had miscarried. They had functionally miscarried, and the thing inside of them, whether you're calling it a fetus or a baby, was not going to come out and be a living, breathing human, right? And so that surgery was often performed so that they could mourn it, right? And have sort of a whole representative thing. But because of the framing, see how we're getting into framing now? Because of the framing of the issue, that legislation, because of the small group of individuals who were doing it for other reasons, didn't want that happen anymore. And then it allowed those women not to be able to have that done either. To go even one step further and to discuss framing, right? Think about abortion and how we often side abortion, right? So, what is one side of or perspective of the reproductive rights issue? Pro-life, right? You've heard of pro-life. So the other side is pro-death, right? Well, isn't that the opposite of pro-life? Oh, it's not. Oh. Oh, it's pro-choice. Oh, so the other side is anti-choice, right? So notice that in the discussion on reproductive rights, and there are obviously multiple perspectives here, that the two main uh, frameworks that revolve around the reproductive rights issue. And notice how I've changed my framing, that I was calling it abortion and now I'm calling it reproductive rights. I'm doing that on purpose so you can see the difference. You've got pro-life and pro-choice. But both of those frameworks are not actually in opposition to each other. They're not on what's called a binary, right? A binary means two: black, white, yin, yang, right? But if you have life and choice, you're actually just using two different frameworks. You're not doing two things that are opposed to each other. And the other one that I really love to talk about in framing is the Affordable Care Act and Obamacare. Um, Jimmy Jimmy Kimmel, and I will try to link this to you next to this video link. Jimmy Kimmel did this great, a horrible bit back when the Affordable Care Act was still being voted on and in process, where he went around and asked people whether they preferred the Affordable Care Act or Obamacare. And hopefully you know that those are the same thing. But listening to people on both sides, but mostly people say, oh, I don't like Obamacare. And then they'd say, oh, so you prefer the Affordable Care Act? Yes, 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 I prefer the Affordable Care Act. And so it's really just about the framing. And in this case, the language is extra fascinating because the Affordable Care Act, right, was labeled Obamacare by Republicans to critique it, right? Because if I put Obama's name in it and you don't like Obama, then you're not going to like the health care plan. And then Democrats, for some reason, started using it in a positive manner. So everyone was calling it Obamacare, whether you were for it or against it. I actually took a quiz recently to get an idea of where my um, issues lied in the upcoming campaign. I already pretty much knew, but I like taking those just to double check. And the question about the Affordable Care Act actually had Obamacare in parentheses next to it, right? So notice how language works to not only create, oh, I'm on this side, right? It's backwards, just so you know. So I'm working on it. Create that linguistic reality, right? But within that, terministic screens work to push us towards or pull us away from something. And I didn't mention this, but terministic screens really use cultural context, right? So Netflix and chill is a great example of a terministic screen. Rape culture is a great example of a terministic screen. What am I pushing you towards? What am I pulling you away from? And how am I using cultural context to create meaning there, right? That's what a deterministic screen does. And then finally framing, right? Which I do this a lot whenever I talk about framing, because it really is, right? What lens or what framework, what thing are you looking through? And that is going to shade or color your reality or how you look at something, right? Um, so that is, I know this video was much longer than almost twice as long as I usually do, but it's so fascinating. I could talk for days about this, right? And and we didn't even get into the juicy stuff, about um, if you're thinking about language that isn't often, well, I'm really talking about swear words, right? And so like how the F word doesn't actually mean anything. There's no sign in sign language for the F word because it means a bunch of different things and nothing. It just depends on how you use it, right? So it's actually an extension of whatever else you're talking about. Um, and uh, additionally, right, we attach meanings to words. So I was in Slovakia years ago, and we were, of course, commiserating about language and swear words and whatnot. And this girl asked what, basically, she wanted to know what the the C word was. We started talking about the C word, CUNT. And in Slovakia, the word is bicha. And so I was saying how fascinating it was that I could say bicha a bunch of times and that doesn't mean anything. Do you feel anything when I say the word bicha? We were in this pizza place and she was like, "You have to stop. Please stop." I said it like 3 times and she was like, "We're in public. You're freaking me out." She was really emotionally reacting to it. But imagine, I mean, it would be like if I said cunt a bunch in a Pizza Hut. Um, you probably even maybe flinched on the video and kind of looked around like, "Oh shoot, I didn't know she was going to do that." Um, but right, so it's not the word itself, it's the meaning, it's the usage that we attach to it. And then you get into how words are labeled and like Obamacare, how they can be reclaimed, right? So the big example there is the word bitch. And how originally that is the a female dog, right? So that's what the denotative definition of bitch is. And then you have it connotated to mean, either a powerful or a crabby or a horrible woman. And now we've worked to reclaim it, right? Like, what's up, my bitches, right? So as long as I'm saying it to the right person, and see this how language functions too, especially in that framing. If I am using it as a term endearment, right? Like if I'm saying to my sister, "You're such a bitch," right? Versus if someone calls me a bitch, totally inappropriate, right? So do you see how the language can function? The language is a way to create meaning, relationship. Oh, reality. It's so cool. Okay, so hopefully that helps clarify the readings a little bit. And I hope you have a beautiful day. Bye.